All right, welcome to Christian Overcomers, and thank you for joining us for this Bible study. Hey, we're going to do Genesis chapter 1 today, chapter 1, verse 14, and we're going to title this one, The Government of the Sun, Moon, and Stars. You know, a lot of people don't think of the sun, moon, and stars as being a form of government. Well, it's actually one of the first forms of government mentioned in the Bible. It's kind of fascinating. This will be a pretty short study here. But we're going to get into, if I can pull up the verse here, see if I can get it here. There we go. All right. Genesis 1 verse 14. Let's start there. And God said, "Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years." So we see here that there are different purposes for the stars. They're to be light. We talked a little bit about that. We're not going to go too much into that, but they are used to divide the day from the night. But they're also used for signs, seasons, days, and years. So there is a very practical purpose for the sun, moon, and the stars. And again, they are for signs, seasons, days, and years. But what are signs and what are seasons? Well, let's look into that a little bit. I'm going to pull up this chart here. The purpose of the sun, moon, and stars. Number one was to divide the day and night, to regulate or govern the earth. We'll talk a little bit about that. Time. There would be no time if there was no movement of the sun, moon, or the stars. There would be no way to have a calendar. And another important usage of the stars were for navigation. All right. So a lot of different reasons. Again, you know, the day. The sun gives us the most basic unit of time. That is a day. It actually goes down even further than that. Obviously, the movement of the sun through the sky actually gives us hours, minutes, and even seconds. Okay. And you can calculate that all by observation of the sun. Of course, today, I don't have one on right now, but today we tell time by, most people tell time by having a watch or the times on their phone or whatnot. But we forget that that's all connected to astronomy. It's all connected to the movement of the sun, moon, and stars. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any time. So here in Genesis here, we have the first week of the Bible, or the first week of human, no, I shouldn't say of human history, but of the physical creation. We've got the first day. We've got we got everything. The first of everything, okay? So the calendar, there's different ways. Let's talk a little bit about the calendar. How can the sun, moon, and stars be used for the calendar? Well, obviously you have the sun is used for each day. We group up days into groups of 7, and there doesn't actually seem to be a astronomical sign or signal that groups up a week. In other words, we don't have something that comes up every week. We've got something close, and that's the phases of the moon. But the moon is used for months. I know we did a study a long time ago on this. We went in depth on it. My view is a little different now on that. I used to believe in a what do you call that? A lunar week. And I do not believe in the lunar week. I do believe the moon, and I can't remember the exact psalm. Psalms 104, verse 19, God says that he appointed the moon for the seasons. Okay? The moon is used for a lot of different things, but primarily the months. Now, what's interesting, and it's been a dilemma since as far back as I know in world history, is the fact that lunar month and the solar months do not line up. Lunar years and solar years do not line up perfectly with each other, and there's no way to actually get them to do so. So there's been a lot of attempts. There's been adding intercalculatory days. There's been, like what we do now, we add a leap year. We add an extra day to every fourth year in February. Those who use a lunar calendar, which was the biblical calendar, by the way, the lunisolar month, as far as we know, the Hebrews used to add a month every so many years to make up for the lost days. They would add a 13th month to make the calendar equal out, and so on. So, but anyways, I mean, that isn't. I guess I'll get into that a little bit. But so the calendar, the stars can be used for days, months, even seasons. When you look up at the star, different star configurations will tell you what season it is, depending on which location you are at on the earth. But it'll also tell you longer periods of time. There are the sorrow cycles. We did a whole bunch of studies on those. If you look into our old, it's only a couple years old, but series on the book of Revelation, we did a whole bunch of studies on the calendar and solar eclipse, solar and lunar eclipse cycles. Those give us larger measurements of time. So yes, the solar eclipses happen in a predictable pattern. So do lunar eclipses, and that actually tells time, but larger spans of time. In fact, in history, many events are able to be dated back to certain eclipses in history. So there's a lot of usefulness for the sun, moon, and stars, rather than just looking up there saying, oh man, that's pretty, that's nice. Well, again, we got to look at the primary purpose. The primary purpose was that these things would regulate time on Earth. In fact, you think about it. The sun regulates everybody's life, whether they realize it or not. I mean, you get up and you eat and you go to bed based off of what? The sun coming up and the sun coming down. So our lives, our societies, our governments, the entire world is governed by the sun, moon, and stars. It is the most basic form of government. It regulates our life. You know, there are some people who are against all forms of government. I'm all for a godly government, but you're really hardcore libertarian, which is actually really ends up become a liberal. But they will say, we don't want any form of government. We just want to be able to do what we want to do. Well, that's not God's way. And it starts out, there are regulations, there's order, there's discipline, and that's God's way. All right? And the last one that I'll recap again, navigation. All right? Let me show you one way you can navigate, and it's by the North Star. You can see up there where the arrow's pointing, that's the North Star at the handle of the Little Dipper. And what you do is you just have to find that North Star, and that North Star it's basically stationary, and all the other stars move around it. In other words, when you look up to that North Star, it doesn't move, but all the other stars move around it. So how would that be useful for navigating? Well, you'd be able to tell your directions, your north, east, south, and west. And if you were traveling at night, you could use that as your fixed point, as your direction north. And that's just the most basic form of navigating by the stars. But does the Bible tell us that the stars were to be navigated by? Well, it does, because it says that, let me go back here. a few slides. It said that one of the purposes of the sun, moon, and stars were for signs. Now, there are different meanings to the word signs, but a sign could just simply mean a signpost to be used as a benchmark for something, right? So you could use that, and then you could use that as a frame of reference, just like we do with time. The stars are used for a frame of reference for time, but it can also be used for a frame of reference for navigation, or and so forth. And I'll even go into something even a little bit deeper than that in a minute. But so yeah, there you have it for navigation, the North Star. I'm trying to think. I thought there was something else I was going to say about that, but I guess we'll leave it at that. All right. So for navigation, a sign. The Egyptians, as you can see here, the pyramids in the background, they used to actually use it was called the heliacal rising of Sirius. It's actually the brightest star in the sky, not counting the planets, not counting the wanderers, the planets. And when it rose in the east, that actually marked a very important time for them. That marked the flooding of the Nile. So when they saw Sirius, when they looked out to the east, and all of a sudden they could see Sirius at I think it was sunrise or sunset. I can't remember which one. I think it was sunrise. They would see, when they saw Sirius just over that horizon, they would know that the Nile is going to be flooding, or that the Nile has begun its flooding. And so it was used for their calendar. Again, so depending on where you're at, some of these things may change. Different stars were used for different reasons. Now, I'm just giving you a very basic understanding of these things. But if you want to get really intricate, you could, there's a lot of, I thought I had a book on it around here, but mysterious things like Stonehenge, where whereas all these stones placed in a circle, huge stones, gigantic stones, and it was obviously tracking the movements of the sun, moon, and the stars. It was some kind of an astronomical observation place, or a calendar of some sort, as well as the Great Pyramid itself. It actually had some shafts that aligned with different stars. One of them was Sirius, and the Egyptians ended up actually, I believe they even actually worship Sirius and made folklore and mythology out of it, and so forth. So some of the pagans would actually worship the sun, moon, and the stars because of the things they brought. They really thought it was the star that brought it. God just said that they're there for signs and for seasons. Okay. So some of these things like Stonehenge, I don't know if they were made by good people or bad. I've done a lot of studying on it, but I haven't done enough to be able to determine if that was biblical priests or biblical people using it for different reasons. I'm not sure. But astronomy, biblical astronomy, is a fascinating field, and there's so much into it. There's a book called The Witness of the Stars by E.W. Bollinger. I'll probably try to put a blog up on this and link to this book here soon. But this book is really fascinating. It goes into biblical astronomy, and it talks about the different constellations and what part of the biblical story of salvation it tells, or what part of the story of the battle between good and evil. And each constellation has a sign up there as a witness to God's word. Another one I got here is All Past Time Almanac for, it's a primary source edition. It's by Jabez Bunting Dimbleby. This one is fascinating because it goes into the different, supposedly goes into all the different solar eclipse cycles and various prominent solar eclipses that were recorded in history by certain events. And this writer, I believe, does a lot of dating, historical dating, based off of the sun, moon, and the stars. Anyways, there's a lot of studying you can do on it. And I was originally going to maybe spend a little bit more time on it, but I do want to get moving through Genesis. I don't want to spend too much time on the details. Maybe we'll touch on some of these things as we go, but we'll see. We'll see. I think it's fascinating. But I thought there was another... Oh, yeah. Navigation. Remember we talked about navigation as a sign. Well, there was a sign used for navigation. It was called the Star of Bethlehem. That's where the Magi were actually able to find the Messiah, was based off of this Star of Bethlehem. Now, there's a lot of different opinions as to what exactly the Star of Bethlehem was. Was it a certain star alignment? Was it a specific star alignment? Was it a supernova? Was it this or was it that? I haven't come to a conclusion on that yet. But I just wanted to point out that this aligns with this Star of Bethlehem being used as a sign to navigate by was the foundation for that happening, or to give the Magi license to do something like that, is given to us in Genesis chapter 1, verse 14. It's one of the primary purposes of the sun, moon, and the stars, okay? Time and navigation. But it also, as we can see with the Star of Bethlehem, actually, now some people get really crazy into this, and I don't get real crazy into it, but I'm not going to discount it. They do tell us of things to come, such as biblical prophecy. Again, how do we know that? Well, the Star of Bethlehem here. But also, well, first off, I want to go back to this real quick before I get into the prophecy. We talked about how the sun, moon, and the stars govern our lives. They're also, when you look at biblical prophecy or other biblical passages, the sun, moon, and the stars are used figuratively or spiritually as government. In fact, in Genesis chapter, 37, the sun and the moon and the stars represented Jacob was the sun. The moon was Jacob's wife. And the other stars represented the children of Israel. And so we see there, and we also see that again in Revelation chapter 12, where the sun, moon, and the stars are mentioned, and you see this woman there, crowned with 12 stars. And that was used, all that symbolism was used in reference to a kingdom, the kingdom of God. I believe ultimately refers to the kingdom of God, more specifically the Christian kingdom, okay? The Christians of this world. And then you have the great red dragon as a constellation in Revelation 12 as well. And it drags a third of the stars and casts them to the earth. So so stars are used to represent governments. And that is because stars were the first governing authority above the earth. And therefore it is used as a symbol of government. There was something else. This Star of Bethlehem that we talked about represented the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, Jesus Christ. So I could go on and on. Stars also represent angels. They falling stars represent falling stars or darkened stars and all that. That can also be figurative of a great calamity coming. Falling stars could also be figurative or symbolic of a change in governments. from one government to the next. You roll up the constellations of the stars and you come up with a new one. In fact, many nations have stars on their flag. The United States, 50 stars. It's a symbol of government, 50 states. It's really fascinating when you look into it. But yeah, they can and do refer to prophetic events. Revelation chapter 12 is one of the biggest examples of that, where the Apostle John sees two great signs in the heaven, one constellation of a woman and one constellation of the dragon. And in the beginning of the book of Revelation, Jesus is holding 7 stars in his hand, which represent the 7 leaders of the 7 churches. That's a government there. That was the church as a governing order, governing body. And they're supposed to give light, right? Government is actually supposed to give some kind of light, some kind of direction. Now, I'm talking about a good, godly government, a Christian government. When it ceases to give light, it ceases to be a good and proper government. So, the sun and the moon and the stars, yes, they regulate your life. Everything we do in life is dependent upon them. Every day we get up, every day when we go to bed, the calendar, you name it. You can't escape the government of God via the sun and the moon and the stars. And it is symbolic, or it is used figured, and it's important to understand. We talked about the law of first mention before. Whenever anything is mentioned for the first time in the Bible, it usually gives you the primary purpose or the prime root of a thing. So when you're studying prophecy, you're trying to figure out what does it mean in the book of Revelation when it's talking about these stars, they represent this, or falling stars from heaven and things like that. Well, you've got to go back and look at what the primary purpose of the stars were, physically or literally, before you can understand the spiritual things, okay? Such as, again, the sun, the moon, and the stars, what do? They regulate your life. Well, governments do that. They're supposed to do it in a good way, in proper order and in proper discipline. The stars are supposed to give light. They're supposed to divide the light from the darkness. You think about governments, what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to make a clear distinction between what is right and what is wrong. And when a government ceases to do that, it ceases being a just government. It's not reliable, and then it's not dependable. But you know what? God's government. In fact, the stars represent God's kingdom on earth. Every constellation does. But anyways, the stars are God's stars up there that represent his government, his kingdom. They are reliable. They do give their light. They do move in their proper orders. But governments on earth oftentimes don't do that. They become corrupt. They become unreliable. They stop discerning, putting a difference between what is good and what is evil. And then if it gets too bad, those stars will fall. And it will be replaced with a new constellation. All right? And that happened throughout history, where God would end one empire and he'd say their stars have fallen. Okay? So when you're reading biblical prophecy, keep that in mind. Always remember the prime root of a thing. With that said, I don't know if I had any more slides here on this. I think that's it. With that said, hey, I'm excited to get on through some more studies in this book of Genesis. The first 6 chapters, even the first 10 chapters, I mean, there is so much stuff in these chapters. It's fascinating. It is the bedrock. It's the foundation of the entire Bible. It's the foundation of our purpose, our destiny, and you name it. Without the book of Genesis, We have nothing to navigate by. I guess it's kind of like, in a sense, the North Star. It's a fixed point, and we can navigate our lives by it. Just as you can navigate your way through the Bible by the book of Genesis. All right? Anyways, God bless you. Hey, we are working on building a new studio here, so if you'd like to help us out, it's going to be used for recordings and hopefully some Bible discussions with guests. Also going to be used for a small group Bible studies for us locally here up in Princeton, Minnesota. And we plan to use it hopefully up until and if God blesses us to the point where we need to move out into a bigger building. The studio is actually going to be, I'm going to be converting my garage into a studio and using it for that. And so if you'd like to help us out, you can make a one-time donation on our website at christianovercomers.com. There's a link in the video description. Or you can make a recurring monthly donation there as well. But hey, do observe what Jesus said when he said when he was tempted by Satan in Matthew chapter 4. Jesus said to him, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." So see that you do that every single day so that you can be a Christian overcomer. God bless you.